Namaste, dear Hindu brothers and sisters. In this Vipathy episode, we examine the tragedy of the Goan Inquisition to understand how Christian theological doctrine practically affected our dharmic civilization. Imagine yourself in Goa. The sun has fallen behind the coconut groves. A warm wind moves slowly through the village. Far away, the sea breathes against the shore. Inside one house, an oil lamp flickers softly. Its light touches a small shrine on the wall. A brass image of Ganesha watches quietly. Beside it rests a worn bundle of sacred Sanskrit verses. The household is finishing its evening rituals. A mother places fresh flowers before the image, carefully arranging the jasmine. The room smells faintly of oil and incense. A boy repeats a line he has been learning. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. He hesitates. The words are difficult. His father smiles, correcting the pronunciation with gentle patience. The boy tries again. Outside, the temple bell rings. Once, then twice again. The sound travels slowly across the village. It is a familiar sound. It has rung here longer than memory. A fisherman returning from the shore pauses when he hears it. He folds his hands briefly before walking on. An old woman seated near her doorway whispers a short prayer. Life moves in rhythms older than any empire. Morning will bring the temple conch. Midday will bring the market. Evening brings the lamp. For generations, this has been the order of things. But in recent years, something has begun to change. At the nearby port, strange ships now anchor. Their hulls rise higher than the roofs of village houses. Their sails carry unfamiliar symbols. Men step onto the docks wearing dark robes. Some carry crosses. Others carry books written in foreign script. They speak languages few villagers understand. The people of Goa have seen these newcomers before. They first arrived as traders, then soldiers followed. Now priests walk the streets. They speak with great certainty about a new faith. Some villagers listen, many do not. The temple still stands, the bells still ring, but conversations have begun to change. At the market, merchants speak more quietly than before. Travelers bring stories from nearby towns. A shrine beside the river has been removed. Another temple has been closed. A family that accepted baptism no longer joins the old festivals. These stories pass from ear to ear. No one speaks loudly about them. Inside the house, the evening meal is served. Rice, lentils, a bowl of spiced vegetables, some plain yogurt, spicy pickles. The children eat first. The father listens while his wife speaks. She heard something in the market today, a new order from the city. No one knows exactly what it says, but people are uneasy. The father shrugs gently. Kings change, governors come and go, empires rise, empires fall, but villages endure. At least, that is what he believes. He lifts the oil lamp and places it closer to the shrine. The flame grows brighter. He bows his head. May Dharma protect this home. Outside, the wind moves again through the palms. The temple bell rings for the last time tonight. One by one, the houses of the village grow quiet. Sleep slowly settles across the land. No one in this house knows that a letter has already crossed the ocean. No one here knows that men in distant courts are discussing their future. No one here knows that a tribunal will soon arrive. A tribunal that will ask questions about homes like this one, about shrines, about rituals, about the whisper of Sanskrit prayers spoken after dark. Tonight the village sleeps peacefully. The lamp burns low. The shrine remains undisturbed. But history has already begun to move. And soon, this quiet house will no longer be able to ignore it. Years before this quiet night, another change had already begun. Far out on the Arabian Sea, new ships appeared on the horizon. They did not come for pilgrimage, they came for empire. In the year 1510, Portuguese forces seized the port of Goa. Their commander was Afonso de Albuquerque. Cannon spoke louder than diplomacy that day. The old rulers fell, and a new authority replaced them. From that moment forward, Goa became part of the Portuguese crown. Trade expanded quickly, fortresses rose along the coast. European merchants filled the harbour with unfamiliar goods. But soldiers were not the only arrivals. Soon, priests followed the ships. Dominicans came first, Franciscans came soon after. Then, a new order arrived whose influence would reach far beyond the harbour, the Society of Jesus. They were known simply as the Jesuits. Their mission was clear: carry Christianity wherever Portuguese power reached. Among these missionaries, one name would become especially important: Francis Xavier. He had been born in Navarre in the Basque lands of Europe. Later, he studied in Paris, where he became one of the founding members of the Jesuit order. In 1542, he arrived in Portuguese India. He traveled along the coasts, preaching in fishing communities and small settlements. Some accepted baptism under his ministry. To his followers, Xavier appeared tireless. To the Portuguese crown, he represented a powerful ally in expanding the Christian world. But Xavier soon encountered something he did not expect. Many of those who accepted baptism continued practicing older traditions. They attended Mass, but they also attended temple festivals. They recited Christian prayers. Yet inside their homes, they still kept small shrines. The images of Krishna, Shiva, or Ganesha remained quietly on household walls. To many villagers, this seemed natural. The new faith had simply joined the old. But to Xavier, this was a serious problem. Conversion, in his understanding, required complete transformation. A Christian could not divide devotion between Christ and other deities. Such practices, he believed, placed souls in danger. The more Xavier traveled, the more concerned he became. He began writing letters. Letters to fellow Jesuits, letters to church authorities, letters to the King of Portugal himself. In those letters, he described what he saw: Christians who still practiced idolatry, converts who secretly followed older rituals, communities where baptism had changed names but not beliefs. For Xavier, this situation demanded a stronger response. Missionaries alone were not enough. Preaching alone was not enough. Something else, he believed, was required. An institution that could investigate belief. An institution that could enforce religious conformity. The idea already existed in Europe. It was called the Inquisition. When Xavier wrote those letters, the villagers of Goa continued their daily routines. The temple bell still rang. The market still opened at dawn. But across the ocean, in Lisbon, powerful men were beginning to consider a new possibility: a tribunal in Goa, one that would watch belief itself. And once such ideas enter the machinery of empire, they rarely remain ideas for long. Far from the villages of Goa, Francis Xavier was writing letters. He wrote to fellow Jesuits, he wrote to church authorities, and he wrote to the King of Portugal. These letters carried concern, but they also carried urgency. Xavier believed the Christian mission in India was incomplete. Some had accepted baptism, yet many continued older customs. They attended church, but they also visited temples. They recited Christian prayers. Yet inside their homes, sacred images still remained. The images of Krishna, of Shiva, of Ganesha. To the villagers, this blending of traditions felt natural. But to Xavier, it represented a serious danger. His concern did not come from politics. It came from theology. In his understanding of Christianity, salvation followed a single path. There could be no divided loyalty. If Christ alone brought salvation, then other forms of worship were not merely different, they were dangerous. From that belief, a chain of reasoning followed. First came the principle: there is only one true path to salvation. It was not Krishna, it was not Shiva, it was certainly not a goddess called Devi. Xavier could not imagine how anybody could worship a female as god. He was particularly outraged by the elephant-headed god Ganesha. To him, they were all vulgar. Only Jesus could save. From that principle came a value. Saving souls becomes the highest moral duty. From that value came a belief. Allowing false worship becomes a form of neglect. And from that belief, a final conclusion emerged: authority must intervene. Xavier therefore began urging stronger action. Missionaries alone, he argued, could not solve the problem. Persuasion had limits. Instruction had limits. If converts secretly returned to earlier practices, something else was required: investigation, supervision, punishment for hidden dissent. In Europe, such a system already existed. It was known as the Inquisition. It was hated there and feared. Its purpose was to preserve the purity of Christian belief. It investigated heresy, it questioned the accused, it demanded confession, and when necessary, it imposed punishment. Xavier began urging that such a tribunal be established in Goa. His letters crossed the ocean. They traveled from Goa to Lisbon. There, royal officials and church authorities read his words carefully. To them, the request did not seem radical. They shared the same theological assumptions. Truth was singular, heresy endangered souls, and rulers had a duty to defend the faith. Within that worldview, the logic seemed clear. If hidden error existed among converts, it must be exposed. If error persisted, it must be corrected. If correction required authority, then authority must act. What began as a missionary's concern slowly became imperial policy. Discussions began inside royal councils. Church officials offered their advice. Legal models from European tribunals were examined. Then, gradually, the decision began to take shape. A tribunal would be established in Goa to investigate belief, to monitor converts, to enforce religious conformity. The villagers sleeping beside their shrines never saw these letters. They never heard the debates in Lisbon. They only knew the rhythms of their own land, the sound of temple bells, the smell of evening lamps. But far beyond the horizon, a different decision had already begun forming. A system was being designed. And once created, such systems rarely remain small. The decision did not arrive suddenly. Years of letters, reports, and discussions had already prepared the ground. In Lisbon, royal advisors reviewed the requests coming from India. Church officials offered their counsel. Missionaries described what they believed was a growing crisis among new converts. Gradually, the Portuguese crown reached its conclusion. In the year 1560, King João III of Portugal authorized the creation of a new tribunal. It would operate in Goa, and it would follow a model already familiar in Europe, the dreaded and hated Inquisition. This institution had a clear purpose: to investigate religious deviation, to identify hidden dissent, to preserve what the Church understood as the purity of the Christian faith. Soon after the royal decree, inquisitors were appointed. They were not missionaries, they were judges. Their authority combined the power of church and state. They arrive in Goa carrying official mandates, legal procedures, and the authority to enforce them. A tribunal complex was established within the city. From this building, investigations would begin. The system relied heavily on information. Anyone could submit an accusation: a neighbor, a servant, even a family member. Often, the accusation remained secret. Once a name entered the tribunal records, the machinery of inquiry began to move. Suspects were summoned, some came voluntarily, others were taken under arrest. Interrogations followed. The questions focused not on ordinary crimes but on belief. Did the accused attend forbidden rituals? Did they keep sacred images in their homes? Did they secretly follow earlier Hindu religious customs after baptism? Did they observe festivals not permitted by the church? Under the tribunal's authority, these questions carried legal consequences. Certain practices were now defined as crimes: possessing Hindu images, participating in temple ceremonies, observing traditional festivals. Even small household rituals could raise suspicion. The tribunal called such actions heresy, and heresy required correction. Punishments varied depending on the case. Some received warnings or public penance. Others lost property or faced imprisonment or execution. But beyond individual sentences, the tribunal introduced something deeper: a new atmosphere. When belief itself becomes subject to investigation, daily life begins to change. People speak more carefully. Neighbors observe one another more closely. Old customs move quietly indoors. Rituals that once took place openly are performed behind closed doors. The tribunal did not need soldiers in every village. Suspicion could travel faster than authority. In the towns and villages around Goa, news of the new institution slowly spread. At first, many did not fully understand its meaning. Another office of government had appeared, another court of the empire. But gradually the effects became visible. Men summoned to the city, homes searched, sacred objects removed, and the sound of temple bells growing less frequent. For the household we first met, life had not yet collapsed. The lamp still burned each evening. The shrine still stood upon the wall. But now, another presence had entered the land, a tribunal that would ask questions about faith, a tribunal that believed error must be corrected. And once such systems begin, they rarely remain small. Once the tribunal began operating, its authority spread quietly through Goa. At first, the changes seemed small. A few people were summoned for questioning. A few names appeared in the tribunal records. But slowly, summons turned into arrests. Those accused of heresy were taken to the tribunal prison. The prison stood within the Inquisition complex in Goa, a place that soon became known throughout the region. Its cells were narrow, the walls were thick stone. Small openings allowed only limited light to enter during the day. Many prisoners remained there for months while their cases were examined. Some remained for years. During that time, their property could be confiscated. Homes were sealed. Merchandise was taken into tribunal custody. A merchant might vanish into prison. His family would return to a locked house, their livelihood suddenly gone. Inside the tribunal, interrogations began. The questions focused on belief. Did the accused attend Hindu rituals? Did they keep sacred images in their homes? Did they secretly continue the worship of Krishna, Shiva, or Ganesha after baptism? Did they observe traditional festivals? Did they recite Sanskrit prayers? Confessions were strongly encouraged. Under European inquisitorial procedure, torture could be used to obtain testimony. One method was known as the strappado. The prisoner's hands were tied behind the back. A rope was attached to the wrists, and the body was lifted slowly into the air. Then, suddenly, the rope was released. The body dropped. The violent shock could dislocate the shoulders. Another method stretched the limbs. Ropes or racks pulled the arms and legs apart, gradually forcing the joints beyond their natural limits. Water torture was also used. Cloth covered the prisoner's face, while water was poured steadily over the face. Breathing became difficult. The sensation resembled drowning. These methods were cruel and horrifying, but the tribunal possessed the authority to employ them, and the prisoners knew it. After interrogation, the tribunal delivered judgment. Some sentences required public penance. The condemned were forced to wear special garments called sanbenitos. These garments marked them publicly as heretics. They were displayed before crowds, their alleged crimes read aloud. Property could be permanently confiscated. Others received long imprisonment. Some were sentenced to perpetual confinement, their lives ending inside prison walls. The most dramatic punishments occurred during ceremonies called auto da fe. The phrase meant act of faith. Large crowds gathered for these events. Prisoners were brought before the public. Their sentences were read aloud. Those judged guilty of persistent heresy could be handed over to civil authorities. The church did not formally execute the condemned, but civil authorities carried out the final sentence: execution by burning alive. In Goa, many would eventually die in this way. Yet, even when death did not occur, the system changed daily life. Neighbors feared accusation. Families hid their rituals. Sacred objects disappeared from homes. For the household we first saw, the change had now become impossible to ignore. The father hears stories from the city, men taken to prison, public sentences read before silent crowds. His old confidence has disappeared. It is replaced by fear. Fear for his family. Fear that he cannot practice his faith in his own home. The tribunal has begun its work, and the people of Goa are beginning to understand that Hindu belief itself has become dangerous. Night returns to the village. The wind moves softly through the palms. Inside the house, the oil lamp burns again, but the shrine is no longer on the wall. The image of Ganesha now rests inside a wooden chest, wrapped carefully in cloth. The father closes the lid. He does not speak. The boy notices the silence. Earlier in the evening, the temple bells could once be heard across the village. Tonight, the night air is quiet. The tribunal in Goa has begun its work. At first, only a few names will be called. Only a few doors will be opened by soldiers. Only a few families will disappear into the city prisons. But systems like this rarely end quickly. The tribunal established in 1560 will not disappear in a year. It will not disappear in a decade. It will remain in Goa for more than 2.5 centuries. Until 1812, generation after generation will grow up under its shadow. Homes will change. Rituals will move into hiding. Entire communities will leave the land their ancestors once called home. In the next episode, we will see what life became under this system, how temples disappeared from many parts of Goa, how families fled into neighboring Hindu kingdoms, how traditions survived only in secrecy, and how the people of this land struggled to preserve dharma in a time of great vipatti. What began tonight was only the beginning. If you want to understand how Goa endured this long trial, continue with part 2 of this story. The story is not finished yet.